warfare, isn't it? However, as we read through the section, the things that he says about warfare cause you to wonder what exactly it is that he's calling warfare. Because it doesn't sound like a typical text on war, of which there are many. And there's a temptation to assimilate them into the kind of traditional text on war. But it's not that at all. War is another thing. Okay, now it's hot. Now it's putting out hot air. War is another thing. I am warlike. Attacking is one of my instincts. Being able to be an enemy, being an enemy requires a strong nature. A strong nature needs resistances, so it seeks resistance. The aggressive pathos is necessary to strength. I'm going to skip the rest of that sentence. Why does a strong nature need resistances, and why does it seek resistances? Whatever warfare means, it means the ability to be able to find a resistance and engage it. And that's a kind of capacity, an ability. I'm able to, and the inability to do that is associated with a weak nature. So a weak nature does not seek out resistances, and a strong nature does. Why? What does that mean? Well, the answer to that, we were looking at a little bit of the answer last time. The answer to that really is not easy to find in the published works, but it's easy to find in the not published works. And the notes that he left, that he was going to publish at one time under the title The Will of Power, contain some very interesting ideas on the concept of living beings needing to find a resistance. Look at this sentence. This is a reference to a book called The Will to Power that was Nietzsche did not authorize, that was pieced together by his editors, but he did write this sentence. The only flaw in the book is that the ordering is meaningless, but the sentence is his. The will to power can manifest itself only against resistances. It seeks after that which resists it. So we already now know that whatever, well, we don't know that, but we've just by this sentence alone drawn whatever he means by warfare in Y7 into the philosophy of will to power. So whatever will to power means, or whatever the idea of will to power is, it seeks out something that resists it. Maybe it's not going to be clear in the text that I showed. Well, maybe it is. Here, now let's look at the next one. A little further on, he says, it can be shown most clearly that every living thing does everything it can to become more. not just to preserve itself. We were talking about this last time. We saw these texts last time. But to become more. And that idea of living things having within themselves a drive to become more is Nietzsche's idea that life is will to power. The becoming more is the exercise of that power over what resists. The becoming more is the exercise of power over what resists. What resists what? What resists the growth of life? That's the idea. If there's a point at which Nietzsche and Darwin really diverge, it's right here. That, or I don't know. Let me put it this way: if there's a point at which Nietzsche believes he is most sharply divergent from Darwin, it is here. He thinks that Darwin presents a view that life, the drive of life is survival and self-preservation. And he really despises that in human beings and caricatures the will to preserve oneself as ultimately resulting in the last man, the least man, the man who cannot, in Section 8, the man who cannot create beyond himself, preserves himself indefinitely. And that to him is contemptible because it denies the very foundation of life, which is to become stronger and stronger and stronger. The presumption is, or the hidden assumption is, that life exists in us only in the situation of being bounded by resistances, some internal, some external. In Nietzsche's case, the major resistance was the internal one. And where did that internal resistance, and what was that internal resistance? That internal resistance we saw pretty clearly when we looked at Wise 5 and the section, The Adder's Bite. And we saw him say, well, you know, in the situation in which someone has done wrong to me, I am overwhelmed by the desire to retaliate, and the desire to retaliate burns up life in me. So that desire presents me with a resistance to life. I am weakened in life by, and burned up in life by these feelings of wanting to retaliate. And so I have to take extreme measures to fight against this feeling of wanting to retaliate. And we said, well, that's very odd, I mean, you say this, but why would you have so life-consuming a feeling to retaliate? I mean, what happened to you? Are you a rotten person? Where did that come from? And the answer, the answer that I've been working on, and the only one I think is possible, is since he keeps saying that this, in Wise 5 and in Wise 4, since he keeps saying that the intense desire to retaliate is connected to his father, and since he keeps saying that he inherited something terrible from his father, it simply has to be considered that what modern epigenetics looks at may have happened in Nietzsche's case. That is, that the father's brain damage caused a radical epigenetic, and that called for overexpression of some genes, underexpression of other genes. The overexpressed genes were transcribed more frequently, and therefore the associated protein with that, associated with that gene was synthesized more, and that became the basis for a chemical imbalance. Or similarly, the underexpressed gene was not transcribed as frequently as it should have been, and that in turn became a chemical imbalance. But in some way, I feel very confident there's no other possible source to which one can trace Nietzsche's compulsive first-order psychology, wanting to retaliate, there's no other origin to which we could trace that than to an epigenetic that was formed in his father's genes as his father's brain disease progressed. Where else would it have come from? And it's so intense on him, the feeling of retaliate, that he has to take such extreme measures. Now, he's doing these things in advance of the rest of us. It's not as if the rest of us are off the hook. But we don't have this degree of resistance to life in us in the form of the chemical basis, which there must be, of this intense psychopathology of wanting to strike back, as he does. But we have something. He is in advance of the rest of where we must go. But his struggle with it is extremely intense. So we saw him say, wrong shared is half right. So here I am, faced with having been done wrong, and the natural inclination of wanting to strike back is to identify and bloat, identify myself as wrong and bloat a feeling of I as the victim of the wrong. I have been wronged. That seems a feeling of bloating an I who has been wronged seems to be where the psychopathology of retaliation wants to go. And so he says, look, if it's possible for you to think about that another person having also suffered that same wrong, that would indicate a degree of mastery over the feeling of retaliation. And if you can do that, I don't know if it's possible given the context, but maybe you have to use a little imagination. But in any case, if it's possible to think of the wrong shared and deflate the bloated I of I am wrong, that would indicate a degree of mastery over the feeling of retaliation. And that mastery would make the sharing of that wrong half right. Wrong shared is half right. Or if you've done a great wrong, add 5 little ones, because I can't master the great wrong. My feeling of retaliation is so intense on me, I can't master it. All I can do is measure out my feeling of retaliation by striking back with 5 little ones. So I'm still maintaining a degree of discipline over my feeling of retaliation in the form of measuring out the wrongs that I retaliate in, by which I retaliate, until the feeling of the overall feeling of retaliation reduces so that I can apply another strategy. But obviously, this is someone who's faced. Obviously, this is someone who's facing the feeling of wanting to strike back as an ongoing psychology that is life-destroying for him. And these are the ways in which he is engaging that resistance. And what he's discovering is the following: that in the case of Wise 5, taking the blame for the wrongdoing on yourself, even while in the right, massive amount of strength required to do that. What he's discovering is that the even the formulation of the idea, hey, if I take the blame for the wrongdoing on myself, even while in the right, hard as that is to do, I will have completely mastered the feeling of retaliation. Even to formulate that knowledge is the exercise of will to power in its drive to become more. The formulation of the knowledge, first the recognition that life is under assault in me is will to power. Oh my God, life is being weakened by me, in me. I must stop that. I must find the thing that's resisting my growth of life and fight it. So already to identify a weakening of life in myself is the action and agency of will to power. To then go on to formulate strategies to strengthen life in myself against the weakening resistance, in this case, the psychopathology of compulsive wanting to strike back, which I say can't have come from anywhere except the utter mystery of an epigenetic that he inherited, that originally formed in response to brain disease. Where do things come from like that? They just pop up out of nowhere. Very compelling, isn't it? The epigenetic reading of Nietzsche becomes compelling after a while. I think it does. Identifying that life in me is weakened by something, formulating a strategy that will strengthen life against that resistance, executing that strategy, mastering that resistance. So I master the resistance to life of wanting to strike back so that I don't feel it anymore. What do I do that doesn't feel it anymore? It's gone at the moment that I realize I take the blame for the wrongdoing upon myself and have completely silenced the psychology, but you're in the right, but you're in the right, but you're in the right, which is the platform of revenge. When I reached that stage, I've mastered retaliation, and all of those steps are the agency of will to power in life, seeking to become more by engaging and conquering that resistance. And that's what life always wants to do. And you really don't find that idea in Darwin. I don't think you find that idea in Darwin.
But how does that apply to normal people? What can we learn?
While his own case is extreme, it's certainly the situation of the normal socialization of Christianity to feel moral outrage at a wrong done to the innocent. I mean, it's the disease psychology, he discovers it himself. He also sees in the world around him. Because of his more radical biochemistry, I think, he is compelled to engage that resistance by more strongly than people who do not have that biochemistry. Nonetheless, the same psychology is in the world around him. But the drive to resist it hasn't come out because it's not as destructive to most people. At least not as, or at least the destructiveness isn't so concentrated. Maybe it's more spread out over generation after generation. But for most people, the idea that I'm right, I'm entitled right not to be wronged, and that if I was wronged, I should stand up for myself as having been wrong, and that the last thing that would be normal in most people's minds would be to blame myself for the wrongdoing done to me, even while I'm in the right. Not only would that be counter to most people's quote-unquote moral intuitions, but Christianity seems to have elevated the feeling of moral outrage in that situation into its central image, namely the supremely innocent Christ wronged by being crucified. Christ is supremely innocent because he's free of original sin. So he's not even measurably, he's beyond any measure of innocence that human beings can devise. So, and in Nietzsche's mind, that means nothing more than the extreme of a concept of innocence for the purpose of inflating the concept of moral outrage at that innocence punished. So when he looks at that, he sees the same psychology in himself at work in other people. Only in his case, its destructiveness is more focused or more immediate or more direct, and he experiences it as an immediate destructive force on his aliveness, and is forced to engage it, and is here to tell you that it's not helping you either. It's also a destructive force. You've been weakened by it. You were unable even to feel yourself to be an enemy of the feelings of wanting to retaliate. You've so embraced it. So it's an extremely challenging and unsettling point of view that says, hey, everyone else, guess what? In all of your formulations of innocence wrong and your idea that this is your highest moral intuition, you are succumbing to psychopathology. And unless you get on the other side of that, life will get weaker and weaker in you. Because that's the way it works. I'm just looking at it working. Oh, yes it does.
So does that mean that Nietzsche rejects the morality in the common sense? So he defines
yes, of course.
So define it as immoral. But what does immoral mean? Immoral, because in our opinions, immoral means that
Find Chloe on there, but keep it so that the last time we have Chloe like this close. You know, you want to just sit around the side there, and so you don't. You have to look at what you're filming.
Okay.
You're filming with Chloe's nose or something. You have to like at least take one look at it before you set it down. Go on, Chloe.
But I think that immoral means that you do something. You means that like you how to describe it? You reverse the relationships of right or wrong. You think something is right.
You think, Chloe. You think like a philosopher. I told you, I'm not truly a philosopher. I'm an absolute invader into the whole territory. When he uses the word moral, he means the existence. He doesn't mean anything abstract.
So what does he mean?
He means the concrete evaluations that are made currently in Christianity and areas of art and science that are related to this Christianity at the foundations of much art and science in the West. So, but it's not a theoretical concept in his case.
So it does not exist. It means
No, it doesn't, and there is no such thing as a philosophical concept of morality.
in his mind or in
Period. So, in the Christian universe, or even in a secular ethics, one has a right. We have equal rights, and you have an obligation not to wrong me, and I have a right not to be wrong. And that seems to be an intuition that can be the starting point of ethical thinking in philosophy. And Nietzsche's claim is that that is not a logical abstraction. That statement doesn't have meaning as an abstract theory.
Oh, because
It's only, it
retaliation.
reduces entirely to the psychology of retaliation.
Yeah.
So it's an empiric, so it's complete. So what you're claiming to be morality is actually is not a philosophical theory, and what you're claiming to be your moral intuitions are not, you don't have a theory of ethical intuitions going on. All of that, the attempt to philosophically justify those thoughts are illusions, and philosophy has been in the service of the Christian illusion for such as in Schopenhauer's case and as Kant's case before him for many, many generations in German philosophy, and all of these attempts to provide a secular ethical foundation for Christianity are just no more than repetitions of the same psychology as Christianity. They're not philosophical statements, they're no more than the expression of an empirical psychology of wanting to strike back. That is holding on to itself by saying, oh no, I'm a moral intuition. No, you're not a moral intuition. You just want to strike back.
So
See the diff?
isn't it proper to define him as immoral?
If his position is that the Christianity has presented itself as right, moral, and ethical,
So
and in fact it isn't any of those things.
so this kind of immorality is just compared with the Christian.
Yeah. Yes. But so we get a book titled Beyond Good and Evil. But remember the line we just read, the wrong shared is half right. That tells you that Nietzsche has an ethic, an ethics. The right.
So what is right? Yeah, okay. So
And notice how what's right is amoral. It's the amorality of nature.
So besides the right, all other things are wrong.
Or yeah. It's only rhetoric to call the mastery of retaliation a right, and only rhetoric to call the decline of life under allowing yourself to be burned up by the feelings of retaliation wrong. It's only rhetoric. In fact, the choices are not one should not need the theoretical apparatus of identifying right and wrong in order to decide on what side of the line one wants to be, on the side of the line of ascending life or the line of declining life. Nietzsche would object to your philosophical mind saying, oh, I need a philosophical justification for saying that the line of ascending life is right or good before committing to it. His position would be, you ought to instinctively know that, and it shouldn't involve thought.
So his right is conscious, is unconscious, our right is conscious. That's the point. Isn't it?
I could accept that, except you haven't. He challenges whether or not there's a theory of good and right that is that you're consciously developing as a philosophical theory. He says, what is good? And with the intent of undermining a philosophical theory in the book called The Antichrist, section 2. What is good? All that enhances the feeling of power. What is bad? All that weakens the feeling of power. And power meaning here. Power over what resists life. It doesn't mean power in the sense of dominating another person. That's been a big error. Yeah. And that's why Ecce Homo was interesting, because all of this talk, all of his efforts at self-overcoming, his ability to be an enemy in Y7 are all self-focused. But of course, that doesn't stay there. I mean, it does leap out at other people, yes, in ways that ethics is not comfortable with. But 1, what is good? All that enhances the feeling of power. 2, what is evil? All that weakens the feeling of power. And 3, what is happiness or good fortune? Good fortune is the feeling of a resistance overcome. Good fortune, happiness, is the feeling of a resistance overcome. Now, what definition of happiness can you remember that you might think Nietzsche is deliberately attacking when he says happiness is the feeling of resistance overcome?
Mastery.
Who?
He
Starts with an M. You got that part right.
he mastered his.
Oh no. No. What philosophical theory about happiness is what other alternative philosophical theory, remembering that Nietzsche is always an opponent of the British philosophy. Yeah. Yeah, what British philosopher does it seem he might have in mind as a foe in the background that he has in mind when he says, and you know what happiness is? It's the feeling of resistance overcome, as opposed to so-and-so who said that happiness is, who's the so-and-so and what did he say happiness is? Mill, the greatest good for the greatest number. Mill, John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill. Happiness is the greatest good for the greatest number. That's what we should strive for.
Greatest good for the greatest number. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's very socialist.
只听这个挺好，我也想听这个，可太理解。
Should maximize the greatest good for the greatest number. Mill is in the back. Uncomfortable being out. I told you, not really a philosopher anymore. I don't know. I kind of, in my crippled way, crawled my way out of it and became something else. Chloe has a philosopher's mind, wondering, what is this? This is, did you read the piece that I told you to read?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah. But half is in the midst.
Huh?
Half of the passage is in the midst.
What?
Half of that passage is in the midst for me.
And it's getting
Half of the passage is what?
In the midst.
She said she can understand half of the passage.
Yeah.
Oh.
Maybe more.
And I think it's getting difficult gradually.
Yeah. Especially it's really long, you know.
Yeah, but you get some idea of that. Well, but what I'm all right. What we're looking at the sentence of a person who is writing from experience and not theoretically. Only because of the resistance that I found in myself, to aliveness in myself, as came to me from my father. And Steinbeck suggests that the pathway that it came to him was the pathway of epigenetics, and that the resistance was ultimately based in biochemistry of radically altered gene sequence by a radical regulation by an epigene, so that he becomes full of renunciation and retaliation that burn up life in him. Now that's quite a different background to a sentence such as this than the background of a philosopher. That background says, remember he doesn't publish this, but I don't know if he thinks that, I don't know what he had in mind by shown most clearly, but the original experience, or the origin of the idea is in his own experience. That I was starting to think about something in myself, and then the next thing you know, I realized that there's something not right, and the next thing you know, I realized that it was because these feelings of renunciation and retaliation were going on in me all the time, and they were burning up life in me. And the next thing you know, I was able to focus on where they came from. And the next thing you know, I was developing strategies to control them because they were destroying life in me. And the next thing you know, as I developed strategies to control them, I became more alive. Holy smoke! What I've just discovered is life is engaging that resistance. And the more I engage it, the more I want to engage it. And I'm now uncovering this, something about the nature of life itself, that it wants to become more. It wants the greater mastery over its weaknesses, over what weakens it.
Is there a concrete example of
Hit.
retaliating?
Huh?
Is retaliation only an abstract concept?
Oh, heavens no!
So what's the concrete example? What is he retaliating?
People retaliate all the time.
I don't know.
Huh? Well, a lot of people do. A lot of people live in a world of...
His mother and sister.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of people live in a whole world of retaliation, and even if their individual acts of retaliation aren't showing up frequently, the psychology for retaliation. And I put it. He's studying the psychology of retaliation as it appears in society, as it appears as social psychology. The main retaliation psychology that he studies is the what we would in ethics call equal rights, moral equality. In Nietzsche's view, philosophers, beginning with Rousseau, following in his pathway through Kant and Schopenhauer, who set out a doctrine of our moral equality, are doing so specifically to thwart the exercise of life becoming more. And why do they want to do that? They don't want will to power to have. They don't want the will to have any privileged rights, which it would have to have if it was going after the things that it resisted. That resisted it. It would eventually have to have more rights reserved to itself, and they would have to be legitimized by the fact that those rights are invoked in the course of mastering an intimate weakness to life. Equal rights does not allow for those privileged rights, knowing, I think Nietzsche says, unconsciously, perfectly well, that if we allow the exercise of will to power, life will get stronger. So whenever we are encountering a philosophy of equal rights, what we're really encountering is a psychology of retaliation. What equal rights really wants to do is to keep life crippled and weakened by not allowing will to power to exercise itself to strengthen it, and by keeping life crippled and weakened, equal rights says, thus I strike back in vengefulness against life. I hurt it. So he sees an ongoing psychopathology of retaliation in the whole socialization of a morality of equal rights. It's going on all the time, not in discrete acts. It's permanently in our civilization. It's terrifying, isn't it? The philosophical world is crumbling. Well, he is. He's the beginning of anti-philosophy. He's the beginning of anti-philosophy. That's quite distressing.
I still understand. Why is equal rights not favoring retaliation? How do the two connect?
Equal rights is favoring retaliation.
But you said he didn't like God.
Because he sees in the thought of equal rights a psychology of wanting to strike back. The advocates, this is in a section in Zarathustra called On the Tarantulas. The philosophers who have elaborated a doctrine of moral equality are secretly vengeful. Why? Because they are trying to prohibit privileged rights of the will to power, and say, no, the will to power cannot have privileges, but the will to power needs privileges in order to exercise itself over what's weakening life so that it can strengthen life. By denying the will to power privileges and insisting that all wills must be equal, the intent of equal rights is to ensure that life is never strengthened. By ensuring that life is never strengthened, equal rights achieves an act of striking back against life. Thus, by attacking will to power, thus, says equal rights, I keep life weakened and crippled. So through the entire, it's an unchanging, unchallenged, unrecognized, hidden, unconscious, permanent attitude in moral philosophy in modern times, from Rousseau through Kant through Schopenhauer. Unstated, unrecognized, unknown, that they're actually secretly vengeful, doesn't really have a robust concept of the unconscious. So his line is that the preachers of equality are secretly vengeful in the language of Zarathustra, which is overly inflated a lot of it. But we can translate it for, as I can say, the morality of equal rights is based upon, is not a philosophical exposition of anything. There is no metaphysics of morality. There exists no such thing as this is wrong. There are no moral facts. There are just interpretations of facts, he says, that we interpret these facts to be right or wrong. But there's no such thing as a moral order out there indwelling in the world. Hard to give up on. But that's the dream of philosophers since Plato.
Can I ask a question about the content of the text you told us to read?
Yes.
Is that...
this is the one on why do you want to kill your mother, my father asked me?
Yes.
Yes.
You said that civilization is epigenetic catastrophe.
Yeah.
And can you explain some linkage between...
Sure. Nietzsche is unmasking for us, revealing for us a tendency, he calls it the tendency toward hatred of life, is revealing for us a tendency toward the hatred of life in the moral philosophy of equal rights. Because he sees that as concealing a wish to keep life weakened and crippled by immoralizing the action of will to power. Right? Okay. As a result of my own, and I'm really very confident that I have inherited a radically altered epigene from my father as a result of his restricted oxygen. I am unquestionably looking at a profound fearfulness of the free play of life in the surrounding socialization that expresses itself generally in fascist and authoritarian culture. So my question becomes, how did humanity get so alienated from life itself that if we accept the truth of both Nietzsche's position and my own, and I'm not the only one who says things like fascism, authoritarian culture is based upon an unconscious or a hidden, undisclosed fearfulness of the freedom of life. How is it possible that we got here to this stage of our development with such a twin antagonism toward life itself? On the one hand, wanting to strike back and keep it weakened and crippled, as Nietzsche explores, and as I have tried to explore, and others before me, with me, the fearful wanting to control the freedom of life, of obedience, civilizations. How did humanity become resentful and fearful of life? I can't imagine that we were this way 60,000 years ago. How could we ever have evolved and surmounted all of the things we had to face with this attitude of hating and fearing the very thing that keeps us going, or being alive. And so I wrote in my blog that I thought that we simply, as a species, became increasingly alienated from the naturalness of animal nature and created civilization. But that I'm not sure that that represents a progression of any sort. We all think it does. Oh my heavens. We are smarter and smarter and smarter until we got better at using tools, and it all moved forward, and the next thing you know, we were putting man on the moon. Well, I'm not sure that the technological progress is the only way we should measure what the meaning and value of civilization has been. If it has been accompanied, if our technological development is accompanied by an alienation from nature, I'm not sure that's a good thing. And I don't see how we could have gotten alienated in that way from nature, except as I don't think we could have started that way when we were part of nature, and so I can't understand how we got that way, except as the outcome of the heritability of trauma, which epigenetics is starting to study, as it passed on from generation to generation to generation to generation until we became terrified of life itself, and then began to produce anti-natural environments. That's what I meant. And it's quite speculative, what I said, but yeah. But that's what I meant. But certainly this is a problem. How we got to Nietzsche's point of wanting to strike back against life and form this violent hatred against will to power, so that moral outrage against inequality. Look at the moral outrage that Nietzsche's idea of privileged rights provokes. All that moral outrage that it provokes, as Nietzsche's mind, is the psychopathology of renunciation, of retaliation, of equal rights. Just want to make that, all that means is, it's horrifying. All that means is we want to keep nature, we want to keep life weak and crippled. But we don't call ourselves we want to keep life weak and crippled guys. We call ourselves the holy Jesus guys of moral goodness and rightness. So, great sections of Nietzsche are devoted to the inherent nature of lying that's found in the position of the good and the just. How did we get this alienated from being alive? It's just unthinkable. That we did. What happened to that? Okay. Okay, let's start here. We're back to Y7. All growth makes itself manifest by searching out a more powerful opponent or problem. So the idea of an enemy is the idea of a resistance to the growth and development of life for myself. That's the context of this. It's not another book on the history of warfare like The Art of War or Auschwitz has a book on war. Oftentimes it's read in a very glib and shallow way, and not as the profound work in psychobiology that in fact it is. All growth makes itself manifest by searching out a more powerful opponent or a problem. For a philosopher, challenged problems the task, it's not just to master any resistance, but only those against which one has to pit one's entire strength, suppleness, and mastery at arms. Opponents are equal. Why? How come it works that when I oppose an equal resistance, life grows? Because life will always be more, and can be more. If it were not the nature of life to be more, it would be stalled by encountering equal resistance. But it's only because it is in the nature of life to be more that it will not be canceled out by that equal resistance.
So after that, resistance is resisted.
Yes.
So
Yes.
return back.
Yeah.
This normal state.
After that resistance is successfully resisted,
So it cease to be more and wait for the number.
it will grow. Life will have become more.
Permanent.
Correct. Once he masters retaliating for wrong, life is life. Things have ups and downs, and he says, I mean, this is empirical stuff. It doesn't, I mean, he can think it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, his biophysical state is as stable as a logical formula. It's not. So he does talk about periods of decline and periods of health. But I don't think he ever completely reverts back to the position that he would have been, that he was in before encountering resistance. So I think that if he does succeed in engaging wrong done to him while he is in the right and nonetheless accepts the blame for the wrong on himself, if he succeeds in doing that, he may have been periods of subsequent periods of decline and deterioration, but I think that's still an advance of some kind. I mean, I don't know how to evaluate that. That's still an advance, and I don't think it undermines Nietzsche to say, well, guess what? He wasn't able to do this every second of every day his whole life. All that is necessary is, I mean, none of that's necessary. All that's necessary is he got to say, when you guys are sitting here talking about equal rights, I have bad news for you. I've explored that whole psychology in myself. It's the same one that's in you. How exactly it can be the same one, and how exactly my inheritance from my father opened up a window for me onto this psychology as it appears in culture, in the socialization of Christianity, and in its secular version in the morality of equal rights. I can't quite explain. I can't explain. I don't think Nietzsche could explain. And I think that there is a possible explanation, but it's very far in the future. I can sketch it out sometime, but it's very speculative. But regardless, even if Nietzsche did not maintain my perfect moral integrity of saying I never relapsed back into wanting to retaliate, what difference does it make? All I have to do is succeed one time is to lift up the illusion of the morality of the good and the just and show you, you know what's underneath that? Underneath that is a psychopathology of wanting to see life weakened and crippled. And quite how you got this psychology entered into human nature, that's not so clear. I have some speculations on that in the genealogy of morals too, but it's a little muddy to say the least. The point is, I've given humanity a direction. Stop doing that, or there won't be anything left for you to stand on that you can call being alive. The species will decline and decline and decline and decline. It says, my first proposition, humanity is not progressive. Higher types appear, but they do not last. The level of the species is not raised by higher types. It's going to take something more. It will take war. It will take hardest and necessary wars and this is where the will to power leaps outside of an internal self to an engagement with the world, but it's still not a. It's still not a concept of domination. It will take war against the good and the just. The party of life, and he uses that phrase, will have to insist either allow privileged rights to re-enter the world and say, in the case in which someone is exercising mastery by his will to power over a life-weakening force and strengthening life by doing that, that action in that human being is bringing the species forward. And we need more of that. To get more of it, we need to allow privileged rights. And so these religious and secular versions of Christianity or philosophical versions of equal rights have to go. And either stop imposing equal rights, or there's going to have to be a war for the salvation of the species.
Privileged rights is like
Well, in the case of if one of the sections we were looking at, Ecce, Homo, Wise, Farm, someone does something wrong to me. My way of responding is to express my thanks to the wrongdoer, and sometimes even to the act of wrongdoing. Why does he do that? He does that solely because expressing thanks to the wrongdoer is a climax of self-overcoming for him. So it's good for me to thank the wrongdoer. In that interaction with the wrongdoer, am I treating him as a means or as an end? I'm treating him as a means to my end.
He's master.
Yes, I don't really care about whether you feel forgiven. I don't care how you feel.
So can I go to the toilet?
Yes, you may. Chloe, what do you want to say?
Nothing more.
Ever?
No.
Okay. Yeah, it's really not philosophy. It can't be. How could it be? It starts with, as my father, it's how could it be? He says, boy,